My HOA won't allow me to rent my home. How can they legally do that? Where do HOAs get their authority? And then how can they specifically either restrict or allow certain activities, this one being rentals? But let's just dive into that. And I'd like to go all the way back to, like, where is the law in Georgia that allows them to do that? How does that happen?
Well, the authority for a homeowners association, or a condominium association for that matter, comes from their Declaration of Protective Covenants.
Okay.
And in the 26 years I've been in the business, I can't tell you how many countless times I've seen owners buy a home and not understand that when they purchase the home, they agreed to a deed restriction on their property, which is a contract between the association and the buyer, that the buyer will abide by the rules that are in the restrictive covenant. The authority for the association comes from the fact that the covenants are a deed restriction that is tied directly to the land. And when the owner purchases their property, there's a clause in their deed that says not only does the deed apply, but all these restrictions that are recorded at the county courthouse in the covenants, they all also apply.
So interesting.
And there have been many, many court cases about this, and the courts have always said, if you buy a home and it has covenanted restrictions, you're required to abide by them.
You got to abide by it. With mortgage documents, you have what's called a PUD, P-U-D rider, which I think stands for Planned Urban Development. And I think that document is what says to a borrower, hey, just so you know, you're subject to the restrictions of this homeowners association or condo association, so you need to be aware of that. Is that correct? Am I stating that correctly, or do you know?
Cleve, you are correct about that. Virtually every mortgage lender has a provision, a piece of paper that's called the PUD rider, as you described it, that says to the purchaser, there are covenants on this property, I'm aware of them, and I agree to abide by them.
Right.
But more importantly than that, because the covenants are recorded at the county courthouse as a restriction, in the state of Georgia, there's a provision called constructive notice. And that basically says anyone buying a property is supposed to be aware of any recorded documents at the courthouse that are pertinent to that purchase. And so the owner's on notice in two ways. One, through the PUD rider, which they sign at the closing table.
Right.
And the other one is just the fact that the covenants are recorded and the state law requires them to be knowledgeable about them.
How does an HOA that doesn't have rental restrictions in place, how do they get them in place?
Well, in general, most covenants have some kind of restriction in them about rentals. And they may be as simple as you have to have the lease approved by the board of directors.
Okay. Because
the board wants to know that all the pertinent language is included in the lease. And that would be a fairly simple restriction, up to and including a rental cap, which says there are a limited number of homes which may be rented in the community at any one time, and the association is responsible for keeping a list and account and only allowing the number of rentals to be less than the cap. So there's a whole variety in terms of how strong or how aggressive those restrictions might be.